Here's the essence of Far Cry 5 in 30 seconds.
Hey. Wanna come meet your goddaughter? And hell followed with him.
Oh, God.
What if Joseph is right? Did you ever stop to think of?
But Far Cry 5 is way, way more than just that. Hope County isn't real, but it often feels like it could be. It's a funny thing actually, because this particular playthrough of Far Cry 5 caught me at an interesting time in my life. For credibility, I've already platinumed this game back when it released and fully replayed it now in 2025 for this video. I have always lived in this city, but the more I stay here, the more I feel the countryside is calling me. So yeah, playing Far Cry 5 oftentimes made me feel comforted. And that kind of personal contrast is the perfect way I could describe this game in and of itself. Far Cry 5 is a contradiction of a game. Breathtakingly beautiful and often brutally dumb. Silly, violent and unhinged, yet every now and then it gives you something thought-provoking. Within the first 45 minutes, the wackiness of Far Cry kicked in without missing a beat. I went to help a civilian that was being drawn by a cultist clutching a Bible, while another stood nearby singing some twisted culty lullaby, killed them both, smashed their skulls, and the moment I freed the hostage, their first line was this.
I just saw Merle driving towards the trailer park right before the cult rolled up. Knowing him, he's looking for a fight. I hope he's got people to help him.
Yeah, in most games that would be the most immersion-breaking moment imaginable. But in Far Cry, that kind of campiness simply works. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the exploding bears and cult karaoke, Far Cry 5 takes its time to set the stage. The game took a page out of the second game in the franchise, and the first Ubisoft-made Far Cry, bringing back the silent protagonist. You play a rookie deputy with a clear task. Arrest a cult leader. Fly in, cuff him, fly out with a target. In theory, that's all you need to do and the game would end. Funny thing about that, if you're familiar with staying put at Pagan Min's stable in Far Cry 4, in fact, you can technically end the game in the first opening minutes. Not by doing your job, but by refusing to. When prompted to make the arrest, all you need to do is wait around 90 seconds and not press any button. So getting cold feet, pun intended, as this scene takes place inside a church, and you'll end up with the worst kind of speedrun for Far Cry 5. It's possibly a suggestion that walking away might be the best outcome one could hope for in this game's world. It certainly turns out to be that way for you, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If you do choose to actually play the game though, your pursuit against the father starts now. The antagonist of Far Cry 5 is Joseph Seed, also known as the Father. He's a self-proclaimed prophet, a cult leader, and a man who rarely raises his voice in order to be heard. And it's not exactly subtle who this guy is based on. In fact, it's incredibly obvious, yet somehow, as far as I remember, sites like IGN, GameSpot or Polygon didn't ever mention the real-life inspiration for the Father. The moment you see the round sunglasses, the calmly delivered apocalyptic sermons inside the church in Montana, it becomes evident that this is in fact David Koresh. Well, a reimagined Ubisoft version of him. David Koresh was the leader of the Branch Davidians, a cult that in the early 90s built a heavily armed compound outside Waco, Texas. Koresh, believing he is the final prophet of God, preached apocalyptic scripture, stockpiled weapons, and surrounded himself with followers who saw him as a messiah. He called their home Ranch Apocalypse. A movie-worthy standoff with federal agents lasted 51 days and ended in a fire exchange. 76 people died, including children. For those of you who want to know more, I highly recommend the Netflix documentary Waco, which dives deeply into the events. Far Cry 5's The Father channels that same unease. The major difference between Koresh and Joseph Seed is that the Far Cry villain actually turns out to be right, kind of. And I love that Ubisoft made this decision. We've all crossed paths with some homeless guy and he's drunk as hell and he yells something like aliens will come in exactly 13 days and you just naturally ignore him. But in my random shower thoughts I often thought, dude, what if that guy was right? Can you imagine? And while the whole time this game gives you all the signs that the father is an absolute crazed madman who started a murdering cult, who thinks God is speaking through him and he sees doomsday will come very soon, you're left at the end in absolute shock when you realize he was right. And even though this game has multiple endings, real ones this time, in the next Far Cry game, the New Dawn spin-off, it's confirmed the father knew what he was talking about. And not necessarily in a fantastical way, but more on that when we get to the actual endings of the game. As you might assume, the arrest doesn't go as planned. The moment you try to fly him out, everything falls apart. A cultist takes down the chopper, you black out, and what follows is pure chaos in true Far Cry fashion. Eventually, you end up being saved by a local named Dutch, which takes care of your wounds, gives you a map, a pistol, and a vague plan. And if you're not in a complete rush, you can actually spot all the villains of Far Cry 5 in Dutch's base. While Joseph Seed might be the prophet and the head of the operation, he doesn't run Eden's Gate alone. Hope County is split into 3 regions, each ruled by one of his so-called siblings, or heralds as the cult calls them. John Seed is most likely the first you'll encounter, as Dutch strongly suggests you should start with his region. He's the voice on the radio telling you over and over to confess your sins. Even though he is slick, well-dressed and always smiling, he's the dumbest of the trio for sure. John talks all about your salvation like it's a limited time offer and clearly doesn't understand what Joseph really tries to convey. He just likes violence and wants to make Joseph proud. Your sin is a weight and I'm here to take it off your shoulder, he says. But what he really means is, you're gonna tell me your worst thoughts while my followers hold you at gunpoint. And his region reflects the same forced purity. White fences, quiet farms, the kind of cultish American dream that looks peaceful until someone drags you into a barn and nails your hand to a board. You'll see the word yes painted across barns, cliffs, water towers, a word that loses all meaning the more he forces it on you. Next region, at least the one I went to, is the one controlled by faith. Now, the game, as you've noticed, tries to be biblical in more ways than one. I'll remind you, the 3 brothers are called Joseph, John, and Jacob. Now, if the name of the woman involved was actually called Faith, I think that would be too on the nose even for this game. Her real name is Rachel Jessup. Hey, at least still starts with a J, and the name Faith is more like a title. And this is one of the more unsettling bits of Far Cry 5 lore, and it's mostly told through implication, hidden notes, and context rather than direct exposition. Rachel Jessup was in fact not the first woman to bear that name. In fact, the role of Faith Seed seems to be part of a ritualistic cycle within Eden's Gate, where Joseph selects, manipulates, and replaces women to act as the cult's spiritual figurehead. Multiple collectible notes and audio logs, mostly from the Henbane River region, reference past Faiths before Rachel. Some logs imply that the previous Faith committed suicide, or was possibly killed, once she became unstable or no longer fit Joseph's vision. This particular region feels the most unnatural of them all, and it drops down the realism altogether. The rivers glow, there's mist everywhere, and time feels like it's slowed down. That's because all this green gas is actually a drug called bliss. This makes cultists blend into hallucinations, and reality is slipping more and more the longer you stay in it. The Faith we interact with throughout the game is often more vision than person, a projection shaped by the effects of the drug. She appears in glowing white robes, floating, smiling, and always calm. What the game tells you is basically never trust your eyes while in Faith's region. And the third and final region is the White Tail Mountains, and that belongs to Jacob. He's the oldest brother, a former soldier, and you feel that military weight in basically everything he does. His region is filled with training camps, radio towers, hunting cabins, and landmines. Here, we don't see people worshipping him like they do with Joseph or Faith. We see recruits, people being broken down, reshaped, and turned into weapons. Which is exactly what Jacob tries to do to you this whole time. Every time he catches you, he tries to hijack your senses with that same song, Only You, attempting to rewire your brain almost in a Pavlovian way until that song doesn't bring calm or nostalgia at the dinner table like it should be, but it brings out the killer he wants you to become. Now that we know what we have to do, let's see how. Well, like this. Okay, but for real, let's break it down. I'm genuinely sorry if you find the shooting or gameplay loop in Far Cry boring. Really, because to me, Far Cry 5 is one of the zaniest, most satisfying first-person shooters out there. Because the true beauty of this game isn't showing in its tight mechanics or flashy set pieces. It's the randomness that makes it shine. Take this side mission for example, where an NPC asks you to retrieve his car, the Death Wish. That's it. Get the car back. Sounds trivial, maybe even boring. But Far Cry's magic comes from what happens between point A to point B. Nobody tells you how to do it. No forced stealth section, no loud entrance, just a vague objective. And that kind of freedom is exactly what I want in a Far Cry game. First time I tried it, I went quiet and failed miserably. The cultists took off and a car chase started. I wrecked my vehicle, panicked, hijacked the nearest junker I could find, but I still couldn't catch up. Second time, same idea. I messed up the stealth again, but this time something different happened. The cult VIP driving the Death Wish was alone. No one manned the turret, and that completely changed the outcome. And I'm sure with a little luck and the right timing, you could beat this mission without any chase at all. And that's the beauty of it. Far Cry 5 feels unpredictable and reactive. You could be hunting down a mission objective and suddenly a bear runs past you in the middle of the road. Or a cult convoy shows up out of nowhere and ruins everything. Now, I'm not saying every moment feels like this. And of course, most main missions don't have that much freedom. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to paint you a Dishonored-like experience in terms of freedom, but somehow in Far Cry 5, chaos is always just one step away, and most of the time, not intentional. That's what makes it funny. Look at this scene for instance, totally unscripted and unintentional, and tell me it's not funny as heck. My thesis for this game is that Far Cry 5 is a game of contrasts, of contradictions, because there's no many games out there where you can go from that scene that you've just witnessed to one of the most gruesome and uneasy moments I've seen in a video game. And it's not the visual kind of gruesome, it's just another Joseph Seed monologue where he confesses one of the most horrible things imaginable.
I took my fingers and I put them on that little plastic tube that was taped. Her angelic face, and I pinched it shut. And after a little while, her legs began to kick and kick. And then nothing. Stillness. Release.
And it's not many games that can make me go from belly laughing to going what the fuck did I just hear in the span of no more than 20 minutes. In keeping with the game's tone of contrasts, I'll show you another random side mission, Special Delivery. It's one of dozens, but it stuck with me. It's exactly the kind of humor that simply works in Far Cry. And it circles right back to the core of my thesis on Far Cry 5. In this case, how well the serious melds with the wacky. A man's wife is in labor and you're asked to drive her to the nearest medical center, whatever that even means in Hope County. So you need to drive fast. In most side missions, driving fast means cultists are right on top of you, firing from trucks trying to blow you up. But increasing the odds of exploding while carrying a woman in labor is far from the smartest idea you could come up with, at least in terms of humor. Still, fast is the only option. And suddenly, this quiet country drive turns into the most unhinged Mission Impossible set you've ever seen. From pigs running across the road, to roadblocks that can only be cleared with a full ramp end, and a burning plane crashing just feet in front of you. Yeah, on paper it reads like a fever dream, I know. A mission so absurd it should shatter any sense of immersion. But in practice, it feels like a joke passed between friends, each one adding another layer of nonsense just to top the last, until you're too deep in laughter to care about logic. That's how you nail humor, especially in video games. If it's a bunch of writers sitting in a room asking, what are kids laughing at these days? Well, you get the reboot version of Saints Row. But here, it just feels like the writers are trying to make each other laugh. And speaking of friends trying to make each other laugh, look, this is the best transition I could come up with, okay? Far Cry 5 is the first game in the series to fully commit to a proper companion system. And honestly, it's one of the smartest additions Ubisoft ever made for this franchise. The game calls it Guns for Hire or Fangs for Hire, depending on whether you're recruiting people or animals. And while it sounds like a small feature on paper, it changes how you play the game completely, and it adds to that zaniness I keep speaking of. Instead of going at it alone or relying on faceless rebels like in past games, here you build your own little resistance squad. And every recruit feels distinct in its own way. Some are just random civilians you meet in the wild, but the real stars are the specialized companions, each with their own personality, backstory, and gameplay ability. Grace Armstrong is your long-range sniper, quiet and precise, and great for stealth missions. Nick Rye flies a plane and drops bombs on command, and that's great if you want air support without lifting a finger. Then you've got Herc, the chaotic rocket launcher idiot who's somehow been in every Far Cry game since 3. He's loud, dumb, and made me laugh out loud multiple times throughout the game. In fact, he's so lovable that he's the star of his own standalone DLC, which will break down of course alongside the other 2 additional campaigns after we're done with the main game. Next up in the companion list is Jess Black. She's the stealth archer type, more predator than person, and has some of the best dry delivery in the game. Adelaide Drubman is Herc's mom, but she's not just here for comic relief. She shows up in a chopper with mounted guns and an attitude to match. Next up is Sharky Boshaw, who brings a flamethrower and a six-pack. And not the kind that you'd find under a t-shirt. But the animal companions might be the most memorable of all. Boomer is a dog that marks enemies whenever you get close to them and steals their weapons after you kill them. Cheeseburger is a diabetic grizzly bear who mauls enemies on command. And Peaches, my personal favorite, is a stealthy cougar that moves like a ghost. You can only have one companion with you at first, but after unlocking a certain perk, you can bring 2. And that's when the chaos really starts to shine. For instance, if you want to start writing a joke about a bear and a rocket launcher guy walking into a bar, you can start here. Companions comment on the world, on each other, they obviously help you in fights, and they rescue you when you're down. Or, as we've already seen, at least they try. They feel alive in a way that doesn't just make them feel useful, it makes them fun. And in a game as wild as unpredictable as Far Cry 5, it's kind of comforting to have a few ride-or-die maniacs at your side. But of course, this is a Far Cry game, and you might think you'd be unstoppable with a guy that has a rocket launcher with infinite ammo, but he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, and friendly fire is not off. For my playthrough of Far Cry 5, I almost always had Boomer at my side, because he tagged all the enemies surrounding you, which turns out to be very useful, but most importantly, I chose him because he's such a good boy. Far Cry 5 ditches the traditional XP-based leveling system from the earlier games and instead leans into a perk-based progression system. You don't level up by just killing enemies or doing missions. You earn perk points, and there are a bunch of different ways to get them. Completing challenges is the main one. Kill enemies with certain weapons, fish a certain number of times, take down cult outposts. Basically, play the game how you want and you'll be rewarded for it. You also find perk magazines inside prepper stashes. We'll discuss them a bit later, which makes exploring the world even more valuable. What I appreciated about this particular system is that it low-key forces you to use variety in your gameplay style. If you love the stealth approach and go through half the game like that, you'll miss out on a lot of perk points from specific guns blazing challenges. So it really pushes you to maybe ditch the crossbow and silenced pistol this time and grab a flamethrower and a rocket launcher. Once you've got points, you spend them in a skill tree broken into categories like survival, combat and utility, unlocking things like extra weapon slots, faster reloads, more health, or the ability to airdrop from the map. It's a system that quietly encourages experimentation. Now, getting back to the contrasting nature of Far Cry 5, that took long enough, huh? This is one of the biggest pillars of this structure. So the game gives you the freedom of choice for most of the game. You can go to any region you want, you can discover the companions in which order you want, and so on. However, there are some story beat moments when that freedom is taken away from the player quite abruptly. You'll hit a certain point in each region, usually after doing enough damage to the cult, and the game forces a story beat whether you're ready or not. You get ambushed out of nowhere, hit with a bliss dart, knocked out or what have you, and all of a sudden you're being dragged off and captured. Doesn't matter if you're hunting, mid-mission or just driving down the road. The main mission beats come to you rather than you going to them. And these capture events become a kind of ritual. And in a weird way, that works. Because just like the cult itself, the game breaks your routine and forces you to listen. You lose control, briefly, and that makes the world feel more hostile, more dangerous, and more in character with what Eden's Gate is trying to do. I've mentioned the certain points you need to hit for each region before facing each boss, so let's get into that. Progression in Far Cry 5 isn't tied to a traditional checklist of story missions. Instead, it's driven by something the game calls a resistance meter. Each of the 3 heralds controls their own region, and your job is to build up resistance within that zone until you've caused enough disruption to draw them out. You fill the meter by doing pretty much anything that hurts the cult. Of course, the story missions fill that meter the most, but you can't do just that. You need more. Liberating outposts, rescuing hostages, destroying shrines, completing side missions, recruiting guns for hire, even blowing up silos or convoys. It's open-ended, and that's what makes it fun. The game doesn't really care how you choose to push back, only that you do. But the more progress you make, the more aggressive the Herald becomes. Each region has 3 main story abduction events that trigger automatically when you hit certain milestones on the meter. After the 3rd one, you're finally able to confront the boss of that area in a proper showdown. It's quite a simple loop on paper, but because of how much chaos you can cause in between, and the sheer variety of activities, it rarely feels repetitive. I mean, it is repetitive, sure. But Far Cry 5 is filled with so much chaos in between that it doesn't really bother you. And of course, each region culminates with you taking out its herald. The first of 3 boss sequences begins with John tattooing the word Wrath onto your skin, the sin he believes defines you. John doesn't quite grasp the meaning of figuratively, so in his twisted theology, the only way to cleanse your sins is to carve them into your flesh and then literally cut them off. Pastor Jerome, who's been at your side this whole time, gives you a wink and a nod to accept God, as it sometimes can reward you with a revolver, and so you get out of the dire situation you were in. After a big firefight ensues, you chase John Seed with the help of a plane, and after a rather cool dogfight, you'll get his key to the… oh fuck. Well, after he miraculously survived the plane crash, you kill him and finally get his bunker key. He does leave you with a piece of honest advice that turns out to be true, in that everyone thinks the father is crazy, but he is not. In any case, you finally get to his bunker, make your way through tons of cultists, and you end up rescuing Deputy Hudson. In classical Far Cry fashion, you escape just as the whole place goes up in flames, riding off in a helicopter while everything explodes behind you. Faith's final confrontation unfolds during the Paradise Lost mission, which, just like every other one, activates once you've built enough resistance in a particular region. Faith's boss fight felt to me by far the most video gamey one, as you can't really discern between reality and hallucination. The scene shifts and Faith appears, guiding the hypnotized sheriff to pick a flower. She swats your hand away when you step in, taunting you before dropping back into the altered reality. In the actual combat sequence, Faith summons angels, resistance of familiar faces trapped in bliss, who swarm you and must be shot quickly. Some clones of Faith appear to confuse you, but the real Faith is marked with red leaves, while imposters have white. Shooting these copies makes them vanish, but only the one with a visible health bar is the true Faith you can hurt. She attacks using long-range bliss projectile blasts, often 3 at a time. They aren't immediately deadly, but getting hit multiple times stacks up fast, especially if you're surrounded by angels. Ammo and medkits spawn after a phase of damage before the fight ramps up again, giving you a lifeline mid-battle. In one of the most eerie moments regarding Faith in this game, she finally slips out of character. Up until this point, she was all dreamy, all calm, hypnotizing. She was Faith. But in this particular line, you can finally hear Rachel.
It's not my fault. None of this was my fault. You think I wanted this? He plied me with drugs. He threatened me. I was 17. I was just a child.
And if you know about the real David Koresh, that particular line hits way harder. When you finally drop her health bar to 0, Faith doesn't collapse as you'd expect, but rather she ascends. Similar to John, she delivers a final line about how Joseph was right about the world's end, but how it's you who will ultimately decide what happens. Then she just lays in the river forming a cross, slowly vanishing. And after all that, you walk into Faith's version of the bunker, guns blazing left and right, and ultimately end up saving the sheriff. Now, Jacob's boss fight is the most straightforward from a gameplay perspective, but I think there's a reason for that. By the time you get here, he's already spent hours trying to break your mind and not your body. The fight begins the same way many of his forced hallucination sequences do. You wake up in that dreamlike training gauntlet and the song Only You is playing again. It's very important to note that you've run this course before, because it is the only course. The fact that it's always the same is at the core of what Jacob's trying to do. Make killing for you second nature. So, shoot the bad guys, reach the bell, snap out of it. But this time, something is indeed different. The final target isn't random cultist number 49, but this time it's Eli, the leader of the resistance in Jacob's region and your ally. When I first reached this last part of the course, I actually noticed right away, that's Eli. And of course, I didn't shoot. I was actually feeling kinda proud beating Jacob at his own game. He wanted to turn me into a killer on autopilot and I didn't pull the trigger. Well, that's why it felt disappointing when I realized the game doesn't let you move forward unless you shoot him. Look, I get it. It's a story beat they wanted to land. But I think there were cleaner, more impactful ways to handle it. The harder route would have been to offer a real choice. Shoot him and feel like shit that you didn't pay attention, or resist and break Jacob's conditioning while Eli remains alive. But even if the goal was to have Eli die, it would have been more effective if he didn't look like Eli at first. Maybe just a name tag. Maybe a glimpse after the shot. Just anything like the red and white leaves from Faith's boss fight. That would have been the real win for Jacob. To strip away your ability to see a person and leave only the target. In any case, you have to pull the trigger. His Pavlovian loop turned you into the exact kind of weapon he was trying to make. When you finally wake up, it's not by any stretch of the imagination with a sense of victory. It's obviously with guilt, and only then does the actual boss fight begin. You find Jacob on a ridge with a sniper rifle in hand, doing his best impersonation of a Metal Gear Solid boss fight. Mechanically, it's nothing special. He's up there with a rifle in hand, cultists scattered below, and you have to find your way uphill to reach him. And I do have another small nitpick here. Because if you think about it, Jacob is supposed to be a highly trained military specialist. He picked the perfect sniper's nest, sure, but the only way to reach him is across this big, obvious log. It's the one path to his back. So, why wouldn't he set a trap there? A landmine, a tripwire, something. You're supposed to be up against the ultimate hunter, but that one detail kind of breaks the illusion. Just a single trap would have gone a long way to make him feel like he's really thinking 2 steps ahead. Oh well. Of course, we can't talk about all this shooting and looting without talking about the weapons themselves. And in true Far Cry fashion, Far Cry 5 gives you a massive arsenal to play with, from grounded gear like hunting rifles and revolvers to total chaos options like flamethrowers, explosive bows, and rocket launchers. The game keeps things fairly modular: sidearms, shotguns, rifles, bows, SMGs, LMGs, and a few wildcards. Each weapon can be customized with attachments like suppressors, scopes, extended mags, and you can apply all sorts of visual skins that range from tactical camo to full-on absurdity and even throwbacks to older Far Cry games. And while we're talking throwbacks, how can you not love that you can blast your way through Montana dressed up as the iconic Voss, or if you want to destroy any sense of immersion, you can go full Assassin's Creed Origins as Bayek. But it's not just the weapons themselves that stand out. It's how the game presents them. I know it's a very small detail, but it's one I absolutely adore. Wake me up at 3 AM, force me to name 3 memorable things from Far Cry 5, I swear I'll bring up the funny and cheeky weapon descriptions. This M79 was in the war. Which war? I don't know, the one with that shark paint trend? Every 80s action hero you ever idolized has blown away the bad guys with this gun. This SMG has an extremely high rate of fire. It burns through ammo faster than you can scroll through a newsfeed. A while ago, this pipe was part of an anonymous leak. The bosses found out and it lost its job. This shovel always sees holes of dirt as half full. Do you think this is still one of the most powerful handguns in the world? Well, do you, punk? God, that's a bad impression. This 50 cal semi-auto rifle has solid stopping power. If it does that for more than 4 hours, call a doctor. I know, humor is subjective, obviously, but compare this kind of writing with other Ubi titles like Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora or Star Wars Outlaws. I don't know man, this game is outright funny. And serious too. Would that be a contrast I'm sensing? Now, compared to previous games, crafting in Far Cry 5 took a bit of a backseat. You're no longer skinning animals to make ammo pouches or wallets like in Far Cry 3 and 4. Instead, the system here leans more into temporary utility. You gather herbs and animal parts to craft things like homebrewed syringes that boost damage, give you temporary invisibility, or allow you to chain melee takedowns. Which is a neat system, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't used a single buff for the entirety of the game. Granted, I played the game on normal, and I assume if you go for the hard difficulty, those are must-haves. But still, I've played the game on the intended difficulty of the developers and didn't feel the need to use a buff a single time. Throwables also play a big part in the chaos. You've got things like molotovs, pipe bombs, proximity mines, and bait for attracting wild animals mid-fight. My personal favorite was setting up proximity bombs on the road, wait for cars to come, and then witnessing some mayhem. And speaking of vehicles, Far Cry 5 has one of the most diverse and over-the-top vehicle roster in the series. Cars, trucks, ATVs, planes, helicopters, boats, you name it. If it moves, you can probably steal it, modify it, or blow it up. Some serve a clear purpose, but others exist purely to keep the chaos going. And I don't know what it is, but for me, flying a plane in Far Cry 5 feels absolutely awesome. I love it. Not a helicopter, which is way more useful and easy to maneuver by the way, but a plane. Speaking of the helicopter, once you get the weaponized version of it, the game can become quite trivial. I've cleared entire outposts without ever touching the ground. And while that's fun the first few times, it honestly takes something away from the experience. Which is kind of the biggest compliment I can give Far Cry 5. I actually avoid the easy option because the messy one is way more fun. Similar to the weapons, customization is here for the vehicles as well. You can customize your ride at garages, slap on different paint jobs, and even order vehicles directly through menus once you've unlocked them. Some are mission rewards, others you find while exploring. And speaking of exploration, Far Cry 5 is packed with distractions, and they're the kind that don't feel like filler because they fit right into the chaos. Hunting makes a return, although it doesn't feel as mandatory as in Far Cry 3 for instance, but still it does help with the crafting. However, you don't need to go out of your way to hunt, unless you want to, as most animals you'll encounter by doing anything and everything else. Then, naturally, there's the fishing part, which is surprisingly relaxing. You grab a rod, find a quiet riverbank, and you listen to the peaceful environment. There's even fishing challenges if you want to take it seriously, or you can just zone out for a while. I think it's possibly Hope County at its most peaceful. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Clutch Nixon missions. Daredevil obstacle courses that feel like someone mixed Evel Knievel with a Redneck Mythbusters episode. They're loud, ridiculous, and covered in stars and stripes. Whether you're wingsuiting through fire hoops or jumping a quad bike across a ravine, it's all designed to be fun. Isn't it nice when video games want you to have fun? However, the game doesn't always contradict itself in tone, and sometimes a mission is just stupid for stupid's sake. In the best way possible, of course. Here, for instance, you just have to get the cows back to the farm, and in order to do that, you have to throw rocks at them. Who cares if they destroyed half the farm on the way there, demolished fences, and practically leveled the place? You got them back, mission accomplished. And finally, the prepper stashes. Each stash is a self-contained puzzle or mini-challenge that rewards you with gear, money, and perk points. Sometimes you need to solve environmental puzzles, find hidden keys, or just platform your way into some loony doomsday bunker. They're quick but creative, and they're honestly quite fun distractions. And more importantly, it's the kind of side content that feels handcrafted, not generated. All of it, the hunting, the fishing, the stunts, the hidden stashes, feed into the same idea. Far Cry 5 isn't just about shooting. It's about wandering, discovering, and getting lost in a world that feels alive, bizarre, and just grounded enough to trick you into thinking it could be real at times. And finally, after taking down each herald, it's time for the final confrontation with the father. Ending the loop that started it all, here you are once again put in front of a final decision. Arrest the father once and for all, or walk away. Each choice brings a different ending to Far Cry 5, so let's get into what happens with each one. First, let's go for the canon version of the ending, although the alternate one still can turn out to be true. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So you choose to arrest the father, and that's when all hell breaks loose. I for one found this final boss fight very cool. He doses your entire team with bliss, turning everyone you fought alongside into enemies. Nick Rye, Grace, Herc, all of them drugged, confused and out to get you. You can absolutely mow them down like regular enemies, but the only thing that matters is that once they hit the ground, you revive them. And the moment you do, they snap out of it. Yes, it's a weird mechanic, but also kind of poetic in a Far Cry sort of way. And this is where the game takes the weirdest turn, and it's a choice I really admire. Joseph Seed was right. Doomsday, in quotes, did actually happen. And as you're about to take him, nuclear bombs go off in the distance. The world around you is burning, and you, alongside Joseph and the surviving characters, flee to Dutch's bunker. In the absolute mayhem that surrounds you, you end up crashing the car and blacking out. When you do wake up, this time there's no Dutch there to help you. He's quite dead for that. Who is there is, well, the father. He gives you one of the most eeriest speeches, telling you that now you're his family, and when the world is ready, you'll both step together into the light. Now, there must be some explanation for this. It's not like the father set up some tiny bombs in some mountains, it was outright nuclear warfare that ensued, and although Far Cry 5 never explicitly tells you who launched the nukes, we do get a few strong hints. For one, radio broadcasts and newspaper clippings throughout the game mention escalating global tensions, particularly between the US, North Korea, and Russia.
More refugees in the Middle East are seeking asylum in the United States as tensions ratchet up globally. The White House thus far has refused to make a statement. Meanwhile, our neighbors to the north have been accepting thousands of refugees.
Some speculate it was Joseph's cult, Eden's Gate, who may have had inside knowledge or somehow triggered it, but there's no evidence that they had access to that kind of power. So I think it was likely a real-world geopolitical nuclear conflict, possibly US versus North Korea or Russia. And Eden's Gate did not launch the bombs, but they anticipated the war. So, what did Joseph actually know? Joseph Seed preached that the world was coming to an end, the collapse as he called it. He claimed it would be triggered by greed, war, and sin. And for most of the game, you think he's just a doomsday cultist, delusional and dangerous. But the nukes actually go off, just as he predicted. He built bunkers all across Hope County. He talked often about fire, purification, and the wrath to come. And his sermons reference specific events that eventually do happen. So I think this suggests Joseph either had access to secret knowledge about coming war, maybe from military or political insiders, or maybe I'm overthinking it and he was just extremely lucky in his paranoia. But the game treats it as he was right all along. And the confirmations we get in the next game, the spin-off Far Cry New Dawn, are pretty damn interesting. First of all, the game confirmed the nukes caused a global apocalypse. Joseph did end up surviving and started a new, more peaceful cult this time. But the most interesting thing about it is you, the rookie and playable character in Far Cry 5, appear in New Dawn. In this spin-off game, Joseph Seed has an enforcer called the Judge. Well, the Judge is a silent warrior who wears a mask and never speaks. They live with Joseph in New Eden, serving as his most loyal protector. Everyone refers to them as someone who was broken by the collapse and cleansed by Joseph. The Judge has a police background, just like the deputy, so yeah, it's blatantly obvious Joseph did succeed in brainwashing you and that the ending we've just discussed of Far Cry 5 is the canon one. However, the other ending could turn out to be canon as well, if you use your imagination a bit more. At least, it doesn't outright cancel the possibility of canon. So, if you choose walk away at the end of Far Cry 5, this happens. You refuse to arrest the father, and alongside your allies leave the compound peacefully. But as you drive away in the truck, Joseph watches in silence, smiling eerily. But here's the twist. As you're driving, the radio turns on and starts playing Only You, the same song Jacob Seed used to brainwash you throughout the game. Your character's eyes go wide, the screen cuts to black, and credits roll. So, what does that mean? Well, it's heavily implied you've been successfully brainwashed and you're gonna murder everyone in the car for one. And even though we don't see or hear the bombs go off in this particular ending, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't ultimately happen. Only the timing is different. So, everything that canonically happens next can still be true here. You're brainwashed, then go back to Joseph, you go inside the bunker, and the bombs eventually go off. So, that's basically the gist of it. And as you'll observe, we're not quite at the end of the video. So before I move on to the conclusion, there's a few more things I need to address in order to call this a definitive Far Cry 5 retrospective. So, Far Cry Arcade is one of the most ambitious yet strangely overlooked features in Far Cry 5. It's essentially a fully fledged custom map editor on game mode tucked away inside the main game. At its core, it's a platform where players can create, share and play custom missions, challenges and multiplayer arenas using assets not just from Far Cry 5, but also from Far Cry 4, Primal, Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs. The amount of content in this mode is quite staggering, and on paper, it's everything a sandbox game should encourage: freedom, creativity, chaos. And some players actually took that seriously, crafting maps that rivaled official levels in quality and design. Although clearly not intentional and rather ironic, Far Cry Arcade blends perfectly with the contrasting nature of this video game. Some levels created by really passionate members of the community were quite good, and others were pure trash. So let's check some of them out. I filtered the maps by top rated and started playing a map called City Nights. At the start of every mission, there are loadouts you can choose from depending on your playstyle. This was a bounty hunt type of mission where you need to eliminate specific targets and escape. As you can see, this doesn't look like Far Cry 5 anymore. More like a Battlefield Hardline, if anyone remembers that oddity. And yeah, it's fun to play, at least once just for the visuals. And I know this tries to be Mario Maker for Far Cry, but when I'm pretending to be some sort of John McClane, it sucks that the enemies in these levels still yell "For the Father" and "Protect Joseph Seed." In any case, you kill the targets and escape in what is basically a shooter on rails type of mission. Another highly rated map was this one called Dagger Island, which is basically a humongous outpost filled with tons and tons of enemies, which in theory should be great, right? Well, it should be, but someone way smarter than me once said less is more, and in this case, you do have to agree with that. What I think could have worked really well in addition to creating the actual map is creating the objectives as well. But I understand that's way more complex and easier said than done. For instance, this map, Dagger Island, would have been way more interesting if you had to kill everyone without being detected, or killing everyone with headshots, or using only grenades. Something that would make the level more interesting to play. I don't know exactly why, but even the best maps from this arcade mode didn't feel satisfying for me to play. And I absolutely love playing Far Cry. Something here just didn't click for me. Oh, and those were the best maps. Here's a 1-star rated map.
Bounty hunt.
Yep, the 1-star was definitely for the dog. But for all its tools and potential, Far Cry Arcade was never truly embraced by the larger player base. It lacked a strong curation, making it hard to discover great maps amid the flood of low-effort or joke content. And although I never dabbled into the creation tools, they were widely considered unintuitive and with minimal tutorials. As I've platinumed the game when it came out on PS4, I played some multiplayer too for some trophies, but unfortunately I couldn't get into a single multiplayer match on PC now in 2025. Still, for those who dug into it, Far Cry Arcade offered a wild, unpredictable alternative to the structured open world, a forgotten playground of raw experimentation and occasionally brilliance. Considering it didn't make a comeback in New Dawn or Far Cry 6, it's pretty safe to assume it was considered underwhelming. But extra content for Far Cry 5 did not end there. Ubisoft released 3 post-launch DLCs, each set in a completely different time, place and genre. They're standalone stories disconnected from the main campaign, and we'll go through them one by one. Starting with the most grounded of the bunch, and my personal favorite. Hours of Darkness takes a sharp turn away from Far Cry's typical chaotic power fantasy and drops you down into a more stripped-down, survival-focused version of the formula. Set during the Vietnam War, the DLC casts you as a younger Wendell Redler, the same war vet who, in the main game, quietly collected memos of fallen friends. And here, you experience the mission that defined him. After a helicopter crash, you're left stranded behind enemy lines, deep in hostile jungle territory with a single objective: survive and escape. The map is obviously smaller and more linear, but it's quite dense, built around the stealth-first approach that the game actively rewards. Every time you perform a stealth takedown or kill without being detected, you earn temporary survival instinct perks. Passive bonuses like faster movement, quieter footsteps, or the ability to tag enemies automatically. Lose your cover and those perks vanish, which makes the silence approach not just smart, but strategic. Along the way, you can rescue 3 captured squad mates, each of whom will fight alongside you. But there's a catch. If they go down in combat and you don't reach them in time to revive them, they're gone permanently for the rest of the run. And this DLC is built around a single objective: get to the extraction point on the far side of the map. That's it. You can technically rush through the jungle in under an hour if you're focused and aggressive, avoiding most firefights and sprinting from point A to point B. But why the heck would you want to do that? It's a Far Cry game. If you slow down, explore, take your time, the map reveals more than just a linear path. There are enemy camps to sabotage, anti-aircraft guns to take down, collectible propaganda speakers, and most importantly, your 3 captured squad mates hidden throughout the region. It was by far my favorite of the 3 DLCs, and that's not because the other 2 were bad. I just felt this new setting and extra content lends itself so well to the Far Cry formula. Comparing to the first DLC, Lost on Mars couldn't be more different. Again with the contrasts, huh? Where Hours of Darkness grounded itself in realism and tension, this DLC blasts off, pardon the pun, into total absurdity. You're pulled out of Montana and dropped onto the surface of Mars, playing as Nick Rye, the lovable redneck pilot from the main game. This time, he's been teleported to the Red Planet by none other than Herc, whose severed head is now attached to a floating robot body. The setup is as ridiculous as it sounds. An alien AI named Anne needs your help to stop an invasion of arachnid-like alien bugs, and to do that you need to reboot a planetary defense system by reactivating antennas scattered across the Martian surface. The entire DLC is essentially a massive fetch quest broken into bite-sized platforming and combat challenges with a heavy emphasis on verticality. The terrain is wide open and layered with cliffs, alien structures and bottomless canyons, but thankfully you're given a jetpack early on, which changes the way you move and fight. Traversing the map becomes a kind of low-gravity ballet, boosting from platform to platform, dodging lasers, and raining fire on insect hives from above. The gunplay shifts too, obviously, as traditional firearms are replaced with laser blasters, plasma rifles, and orbital death rays. Combat is faster, flashier, and much more chaotic than in the main game. Enemies come in swarms, often charging in from all sides, and the horde-style encounters can feel overwhelming if you're under-equipped. There's a light progression system that lets you upgrade your weapons, health and jetpack fuel by collecting Hemolium, an alien resource dropped by enemies and found in outposts. It's basically money on Mars. The map is dotted with alien structures to reclaim, clones of Herc's body parts to recover, and bizarre radio towers that broadcast aggressively dumb American propaganda to Martian soil. In theory, it might sound boring, but while Herc may be a little much for some people, and I get that, he made me belly laugh way more times than I expected, so Far Cry on Mars, collecting shit, shooting aliens, and laughing at its stupidity every once in a while, it's an evening well spent in my book. If Hours of Darkness was the serious one, and Lost on Mars was the weird one, then Dead Living Zombies is Far Cry's version of Call of Duty Zombies, completely off its meds. Instead of being a normal map or having a regular story, this DLC plays out across 7 short scenarios, each one a ridiculous zombie movie pitch from a delusional film director named Guy Marvel. And that name should sound familiar if you've explored all the content from the main game. He's the same loudmouth you may remember annoying everyone in Hope County while trying to shoot the film Far Cry Blood Dragon. In this DLC, Dead Living Zombies, you're not actually playing real events. Well, no shit, you're fighting zombies. What I mean by that is that what you're playing through is a movie pitch, which means the rules of logic, pacing, or even consistency are constantly thrown out the window. As the director is pitching his movie, your scene constantly changes. More explosions, Romeo and Juliet love stories through a zombie apocalypse, the whole thing plays out like a parody of Far Cry itself. And that's kind of the point. Gameplay-wise, as you can imagine, it's pure arcade action. you're thrown into a linear level with whatever guns the scenario gives you, and you mow down waves of increasingly aggressive zombies while completing simple objectives like holding a point, reaching an escape zone, or escorting someone too dumb to live. In this third and final DLC for Far Cry 5, there's no stealth, no open world, and no collectibles. Which is understandable as you're fighting zombies, but in my opinion, this was the weakest out of all the add-on content. Interesting distraction, I'll give it that, but not unlike the arcade mode, it just doesn't feel like Far Cry. Maybe it's my OCD, but I would have preferred all three add-ons to be similar in terms of how they're organized. Hours of Darkness and Lost on Mars are full-fledged Far Cry mini spin-offs, with a map, side content, and everything that makes Far Cry Far Cry. But Dead Living Zombies is a mission-based zombie shooter. After an hour at most, you've pretty much seen every gag this DLC has to offer, and the repetition starts to set in. But for what it is, a goofy, self-aware parody, it doesn't overstay its welcome. All that being said, Far Cry 5 included the kind of DLC I always appreciate, and that's the kind of additional content that's separated entirely from the main game. I for one hate it when a DLC comes out a year later that's only accessible from the main game's world and sometimes playable only after beating the main story. Here you can play any of the DLCs without ever booting the main game and still enjoy them at their full potential. So with all the content this game has to offer out of the way, well, it's time for us to reach a verdict. Right now, 7 years after the game's release, having the privilege of hindsight, it's very important that we address how the game did on the market. Well, Far Cry 5 is still the best-selling game in the franchise by quite a margin. It became the fastest-selling title in the series and sold over 20 million units by 2020, far exceeding sales of its predecessors. The second spot on that list is occupied by Far Cry 3. Arguably the most loved entry in the series, but even that game sold only half as much as Far Cry 5. And I think now more than ever, that says a lot. Why? Because Far Cry 6, the newest game in the series, hasn't sold anywhere near that. Ubisoft's only official statements regarding the sales number of 6 was that it sold around 370,000 units in its first week, and that it performed in line with Assassin's Creed Odyssey as a solid performer. And we all know that's corporate talk. If the game outsold Far Cry 5, they would have definitely told us by now. And you know what's most surprising? Is that Far Cry 6 should have sold a lot more copies. I'm not saying it bombed or anything, I'm sure it made quite a bit of money for the company, but Far Cry 6 had all the ingredients to be a massive seller. First of all, they went all in on the villain, bringing in Hollywood A-lister Giancarlo Esposito to play the bad guy. And as far as the setting goes, they went for a fictional tropical island, hitting every bit of nostalgia checklist for the fans of Far Cry 3. Oh, and the actual game wasn't bad, buggy, or anything like that. In fact, it was pretty damn awesome. So on paper, it should have been the best-selling game in the series. But in reality, Far Cry 5 remained the undisputed king, at least in terms of sales. Now, looking back on Far Cry 5, what stands out isn't just how much it borrowed from the games before it. It's how boldly it redefined what Far Cry could be. Is it blasphemous to say Far Cry 5 is the best game in the series? Maybe. But I don't think it's that far-fetched. On the Far Cry throne sits the third entry. We know that. It's probably in the top 25 most influential and important games of all time. Nothing can take that away from it. But Far Cry 5 did something else. It introduced the most dynamic world the series had ever seen, the most reactive, and the most unpredictable. It removed the minimap, gave you the freedom to go in any direction, and trusted you to get lost. And all of this was, of course, intentional. Creative director Dan Hay expressed the desire to create what he termed the Anecdote Factory, a game where two players could venture out from the same point in opposite directions and have entirely different experiences that they would then share with one another anecdotally. And that mantra is felt throughout this whole experience. Even the main progression system of the game is one that I deem masterfully crafted. The resistance meter was one of the biggest shifts Far Cry 5 made from its predecessors. In previous entries, you were always climbing towers, unfogging the map, capturing outposts, and always taking boxes off. Progression felt 100% like clearing a checklist. And if you're a Far Cry fan like myself, you know that's at the core of why Far Cry feels so good to play. So, instead of getting rid of that checklist feel, which would have been a grave mistake, Far Cry 5 smartly evolved it. In this game, every action you take against Eden's Gate adds to this invisible tug of war. You just need to damage the cult in any way you choose to do so. And by doing that more and more, the cult leader obviously notices you're doing damage to their turf, and in response they become more aggressive. It all feels natural. You don't go from 0 to 100. You go from 1 to 2 to 3 and so on. It's a back and forth that no other Far Cry game has done before. You're actively destabilizing a region, and the cult desperately fights back. When I first played this game, I remember being annoyed at all these interruptions from the world. Then I realized, yeah, this is kind of how it should be if you're going for the more immersive experience. A lot of video games suffer from the Truman Show problem, as I like to call it. Everything and everyone in the game exists for you. You pass a random NPC, then they cease to exist. Nothing happens in the background, as it were. But in Far Cry 5's case, that simply isn't true. Oh, and if I might go back on the commercial success of Far Cry 5, I think one of the biggest reasons for its huge sales numbers was the setting. Even though you, as the rookie, don't speak in the game, I believe Montana is the actual silent protagonist of this game. Rolling wheat fields that glow gold in the sunset, rivers that cut through endless forests, the jagged teeth of the Rockies looming in the distance. On the surface, it feels like a paradise, and the game never lets you forget that. You can spend hours just walking through a forest or flying over miles of untouched wilderness, soaking in a landscape that feels timeless. But of course, beneath that beauty runs a darker undercurrent. The isolation of Montana, the distance between towns, the long stretches of highway with no one around, it all feeds into the paranoia that makes Eden Gate believable. In this place, it doesn't take much for communities to cut themselves off from the outside world, to become self-sufficient, to fall under the sway of someone like Joseph Seed. The geography itself makes the cult possible. And the way the game uses American iconography, barns painted with red and white, churches on every hilltop, stars and stripes flags fluttering from porches, that blurs the line between safety and menace. By treating Montana not just as a random setting, but as a character that's beautiful, fragile, and corrupt, Far Cry 5 grounds its story in a way no other entry in the series has. It reminds you that paradise and paranoia can share the same soil. So we've established the setting of this game is gorgeous and feels alive. But what about what happens in it? Well, the game's narrative didn't just tell you about a cult. It dropped you in the middle of one, gave you a gun, and dared you to make sense of it all. And when it ended, it didn't pat you on the back. You didn't win. Unless you completely walk away, thus not even playing the game, you do not win. For a series that's often accused of feeling the same, Far Cry 5 feels like the rare sequel that tried to evolve, not just repeat. It gave us a world worth exploring, villains worth fearing, and an ending worth talking about. I know I've made it into a joke at this point, but I'm being serious. Far Cry 5 is a game of contrasts. And my god, does it work. It gives you an open-world playground full of explosive toys, and then fills it with themes of radicalization, cult psychology, and the quiet dread of an America that's slowly eating itself alive. It encourages chaos, but sets it in a world that feels grounded. You can skydive into a gunfight with a bear sidekick named Cheeseburger that has diabetes, and then immediately stumble across a church full of brainwashed worshippers singing hymns to a man who thinks he's God, that in a cutscene confesses you the murder of his own child. And for a game that deals so heavily in American iconography, flags, faith, guns, and paranoia, it never tells you how to feel. It just drops you in the middle of it and lets you draw your own lines between fantasy and truth. It's hard to find a good ending for every kind of story. In film, in books, and most certainly in video games. But now that I think about it, Far Cry 5's ending might be one of my favorite ones. Why? Because you don't really triumph. It doesn't end well. The knight doesn't save the princess, and it's a shitty type of ending. You practically end up being a brainwashed slave to a madman. But what I loved about this ending, it's that it had the balls to not be a fairy tale. You had fun playing it, you enjoyed the chaos, you laughed along the way, but in the end, it all went to shit. And as we've established already, the game does have multiple endings, but I think it's such a smart choice to make them both bad endings, in quotes. Usually, depending on your actions throughout the game, you either get the good one or the bad one. But here, it's just the illusion of a choice. And in the real world, that kinda happens. And on that note, let me end by saying something that might sound stupid. yet I think it's deep. Far Cry 5 is my favorite game from the series, not because it's the best one necessarily, but because it's the most Far Cry. Thank you so much for watching this whole thing. I enjoyed making it quite a bit, and it gave me a reason to truly dive into this world, thus seeing it for what it truly is. I try not to put too much YouTube cringe in my videos, but leaving a like always helps, subscribing too if you enjoy this type of content, and I'll see you guys on the next one.